Hey everyone, welcome in. Today's deep dive is, well, it's a little different, huh? A little heavier than usual, I'd say. We're really diving into the Hurricane Helene aftermath. And I know you've all seen the pictures by now, heard those initial reports, but we're going deeper here. You've sent over a ton of articles, firsthand accounts, really a lot to process. We're going to really try and understand, I don't know, the story asterisk behind asterisk the storm. And one thing that really jumps out right away is the insurance situation. It's bleak.
Yeah, you're right. You see, hurricanes themselves are unfortunately familiar in the Southeast, a fact of life. And Helene's path and intensity, while devastating, weren't, historically unusual for a hurricane. The real curveball here is how many people are facing this recovery, well, practically asterisk, uninsured asterisk.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack that a bit. I was reading this Associated Press piece. They did some really great on-the-ground reporting in Asheville, North Carolina. One detail that really stuck with me, there was this woman, Julianne Johnson, and she was using a asterisk dry erase board asterisk to talk to her neighbors because the power was out for so long.
Yeah, it really speaks to the resilience of these communities, doesn't it? I mean, they're faced with these extraordinary circumstances and they adapt, they find a way. But it also, I think, underscores a lack of preparedness for an event of this magnitude. And that's where this whole insurance gap becomes especially alarming.
Absolutely. And it's not just the inconvenience, right? This is about people's livelihoods, their homes. The same article, they talk about this man, Dave Barringer, who decided to stay put while his wife evacuated. The way he describes the floodwater, it wasn't this gradual rise. It was like the whole world just asterisk, surged asterisk in trapping people in their homes. It's harrowing stuff.
And sadly, Barringer's experience, while terrifying, isn't unique. The satellite images from CBS showing entire neighborhoods just reduced to rubble. They really emphasize the widespread destruction across North Carolina and Tennessee, and this lack of flood insurance in these areas is going to have a ripple effect that goes far beyond the immediate losses.
It's just, it's hard to even fathom the scope of it sometimes. And then you layer on top of it that so many people weren't prepared for this financially.
Yeah.
It's overwhelming.
It really is. It's a recipe for a long and difficult recovery. And it raises serious questions about how we can better prepare for these types of events in the future.
And that lack of insurance, you're right, it's not just about inconvenience, right? We're talking about financial devastation. But like on a massive scale, Grist was citing these estimates from AccuWeather. And get this, the total damage from Hurricane Helene, it could be pushing $250 trillion asterisk dollars.
Yeah, it's a mind-boggling figure. And what's even more alarming is that the percentage of those losses, they're likely uninsured. We're potentially talking about an insurance gap that, well, it dwarfs anything we've seen in recent history.
So, I mean, what happens then? If private insurance isn't covering this and people can't afford to rebuild, do these communities just, I don't know, do they just fall apart?
Well, that's the fear, isn't it? And it highlights this fundamental flaw in how we've traditionally dealt with, flood risk here in this country. You see, after this series of really catastrophic floods back in the early 20th century, most private insurers, they just deemed flood insurance too risky to offer.
Yeah, which makes sense, I guess, on a business level.
Yeah.
But then where do people turn?
Well, that's where the government stepped in. They created the National Flood Insurance Program, or NFIP, as this kind of like safety net.
Okay, so their eye is a safety net, but it's clearly not holding up in this case. Why not?
Well, the NFIP, it's been struggling for years, honestly. It's billions of dollars in debt, partly due to chronic, I'd say, underpricing of risk and these repeated payouts to properties that are in these high-risk areas. And because of these financial woes, participation, especially outside of these designated flood zones, it's shockingly low. People just aren't insuring their homes against floods.
Yeah, and I get it, right? It won't happen to me until it does.
Mm-hmm.
But then we're left with this massive gap.
Exactly. And Hurricane Helene has thrown that gap into stark relief. If you compare it to Hurricane Ian last year, for example, much of Ian's damage was wind-related, which is typically covered by, standard homeowners insurance. But Helene was different. The flooding, that's the primary story here. And for those without flood insurance, the road to recovery is going to be, incredibly difficult.
So we've got communities in ruins, families facing these unimaginable financial burdens, and a system that seems, I don't know, ill-equipped to handle the scale of this problem. What happens next? Where do we even begin to pick up the pieces?
It's a complex question with no easy answers. FEMA and other agencies, of course they will provide assistance, but their resources are already stretched thin. And even when aid is available, it often takes far too long to reach the people who need it most.
Right, and on top of those logistical and financial hurdles, there's the human cost of this disaster that I don't think we can ignore. I keep thinking about that Assembly article, that a firsthand account from Asheville. It really brought home the emotional weight of what these communities are going through. That image of the shipping container wedged into a bridge, it's just this powerful symbol of the sheer force of nature, but also the fragility of the systems that we rely on.
It's a stark reminder that the true cost of these disasters, it goes far beyond dollars and cents. The psychological toll, the trauma, the loss of community cohesion, those are all factors that will continue to impact survivors long after the floodwaters recede.
And long after, I imagine, the news crews have packed up and moved on to the next story. It's easy to forget about these things when they're not right in front of us.
It is. But the effects, they linger, both for the individuals and for the communities as a whole. And that's something that I think we need to be more mindful of as we talk about recovery and rebuilding.
And it's that human side of it that really, I don't know, sticks with you, right? The Assembly article, I mean, as devastating as it was, it also showed this like incredible resilience. They talk about people lining up for gas for like hours, relying on these community bulletin boards because, the internet and cell service were down. It's this strange juxtaposition, this high-tech world kind of brought to its knees, and it's human kindness that steps in.
Yeah, absolutely. Disasters, I think, often expose the vulnerabilities of our modern infrastructure, but at the same time, they also reveal the strength of that human connection. Those community bulletin boards, they became these lifelines, sharing that vital information when all those traditional communication channels failed. It's really a powerful testament to, I think, that enduring human spirit.
Yeah, it's inspiring for sure. But those early acts of kindness, as essential as they are, they're just the first step in what's going to be a long and difficult journey.
Yeah.
We've talked about the financial burdens, the
Yeah.
insurance gaps, but what about the long-term mental health implications for these survivors?
Yeah.
The trauma of living through something like this doesn't just disappear overnight.
You're absolutely right. It's a critical aspect of disaster recovery, and it often gets, I think, overshadowed. The psychological scars of a disaster, they can run really deep. Anxiety, depression, even PTSD, these are all very real concerns for survivors, especially those who've experienced loss, whether it's loved ones, homes, or livelihoods.
Yeah. And when you layer on top of that the fact that many of these communities already had very limited access to mental health services, even before the hurricane hit. It just paints, I don't know, it's not a pretty picture for the long-term recovery.
No, it's not. It raises some serious concerns about the availability of, adequate support systems. And it really underscores the need, I think, for a more holistic approach to disaster recovery, one that addresses not just the physical rebuilding, but also the emotional well-being of those survivors, those who've been through it.
So, if we can maybe try to find a tiny sliver of hope here, what can be done? Is this a wake-up call, do you think? Will Hurricane Helene finally force us to address this insurance gap, these vulnerabilities in the system?
Well, one can only hope, right? But we've seen this pattern before, haven't we? A major disaster, it strikes. There's an outpouring of support, calls for change. But then as time passes, that urgency, it kind of fades. And we find ourselves, caught off guard once again.
It's a cycle we desperately need to break.
Yeah.
Because the reality is, and I think we all know this, as climate change accelerates, these extreme weather events, they're only going to become more frequent, more intense, and probably even more devastating.
Precisely. This isn't just about Hurricane Helene. It's about fundamentally rethinking how we as a society prepare for and respond to these disasters. It's about acknowledging the true cost, not just in terms of dollars and cents, which is significant, but also in terms of human suffering. And it's about recognizing that a failure to act now will have very real and very profound consequences for generations to come.
That's a sobering thought to end on, but an incredibly important conversation to have. So thank you really to expert speaker for joining me today and, lending your expertise to this incredibly important issue. And to all of you listening, thank you. We hope this deep dive has given you, maybe a deeper understanding of this Hurricane Helene aftermath, beyond just the headlines, beyond those initial reports, and maybe, hopefully, has even sparked some reflection, some thought on what we can all do, in our own ways to build a more resilient future for everybody.